What up, Muggles? This is Fyrebyrd, and I'm here with Ridgeback. And you're listening to the Dusty Caldron, where we talk about all things Harry Potter and the witchy world at large. Today we are going to do an Auror Files episode. This is going to be one of the first times we've done that. When we do Auror Files, they're going to be either a true crime case that definitely happened in the series, like we've read it in the books, or one that maybe could have happened in the series and just wasn't in the books. And this is sort of a nod to my minor obsession with true crime podcasts. So today, it's kind of perfect that we've got Ridgeback as the person that we're going to do the case with, because as you remember him from the Ickle episodes, he has not gotten to book number 4 yet. And the case that we're going to talk about is in book 4. So there is a little bit of spoiler for that, but I don't think it's going to ruin the book for you. You just will know that none of your predictions can be about the Riddle murder. So we are going to talk about the Riddle Murders. And I'm going to start by having us talk about the riddles. So the riddles were 1%ers for sure. They lived in Little Hangleton, but they actually owned most of Little Hangleton. And then the village around them was basically sinking into poverty. There were people living literally in shacks. Like, it's pretty bad. But they're living in a mansion up on the hill, and life's perfect for them. So we're already kind of starting off with maybe people don't love the riddles. So it's not probably all surprising that I'm going to tell you that the murder victims we're talking about are the riddles, right? But let's talk a little bit about their family. So there was Thomas, the father. Thomas was 65 when he died, and his wife, Mary, was 58 when she died. And then the third victim, which was Tom Riddle, was 38 when he died. Now, this is something I find really fascinating because with all of the references we get to this, we call the Tom that died at 38 Tom Riddle Sr., and we call someone that we're going to talk about later on Tom Riddle Jr. But the father's name was Thomas, so he actually is Tom Riddle Senior, and then Tom Riddle Senior is Junior, and Tom Riddle Jr. is actually Tom Riddle the Third. It's a really interesting, just like, doesn't quite make sense with how that played out. I don't know if maybe the family tree wasn't fully developed when we started calling Tom Riddle Jr. But yeah, the dad was also named Tom, so he is the senior. Okay, so they were found murdered in their home, and this happened in 1943. Now, Tom Riddle Sr. was the younger son. So when I say senior, I'm going to be talking about the middle Tom, but just keep in mind that his dad's name is Thomas. So Tom Riddle Sr. was romantically involved with Merope Gaunt. This started around like 1925. So they were actually together for quite some time before this murder took place.
Okay.
What's really interesting is Merope Gaunt was like the daughter of the village tramp. And so this relationship was in no way approved by his parents, right? It was, he was being raised to take over the 1% family household, and he was obviously supposed to marry a 1%er and all that. And he ran off and he married Merope and got her pregnant. And that is where Tom Riddle Jr. is going to come into play later. But so let's talk about first him running off with Merope. Ultimately, they left for a little while. They were living in London, and they were together for at least a year before she got pregnant. And from all of this, it's like we don't really know what happened, because we as Muggles in Little Hangleton don't really know what happened, because they were not in Little Hangleton. And you have to remember, this is like back in the day. It's not like people are texting each other or anything like that. So it's like they've left, they're together, and then all of a sudden Tom arrives back in Little Hangleton, no wife to be found, and is talking about how she's been scamming him, that this was all a lie, that he wants nothing to do with her, that they're not married anymore. There's no talk of them actually legally getting divorced, so I don't know that he actually divorced her, but he definitely like disowned her. And this is 1926. We're not talking about a good time to be a single mother. Right. So we're kind of wondering what happened there. Now, to be fair, the people of Little Hangleton may not know that Merope was pregnant, because again, they ran off together. But he definitely knows that she is pregnant with his child. That's like part of this whole thing where they've split up and he's come running back to his parents. And so we have this sort of nasty situation going on. And then there's just going to be a gap in time where the life for the Riddle family is pretty uneventful. We're not really hearing anything about it. And so we're actually going to skip to a different person that's involved in the story. And I want to talk to you a little bit about Frank Bryce. So Frank Bryce was born in 1917. So he's pretty young when all of this is happening. This is all playing out in 1926. He's still a kid. But Frank grows up and he actually goes off and he fights in World War II. And he is a soldier there for a while. But he eventually comes home and he left with a lot of pain issues. He served for 3 years and he severely injured his leg when he leaves and has all of these medical problems. It's not really disclosed to us, but it's sort of heavily implied that he may have been medically discharged. Ooh. But he comes back home to Little Hangleton and becomes a gardener for the Riddle family. So now he is an adult. He is working for the Riddle family, like everybody in Little Hangleton is working for the Riddle family. But he actually lives on the Riddle estate, and he is 29 at the time that all of this drama is going to go down. Another person that works on the Riddle estate is actually his childhood friend, Dot. Dot is a maid for the Riddle family. And so she has a key to the Riddle house, and Frank has a key to the Riddle house. And it's actually Dot that discovers the bodies when all 3 Riddles are found dead after having had like family dinner together. Huh. It's really interesting. But so Frank was given a small cottage on the property. He had a spare key to the house. There was not any sign of forced entry to the house when this was all investigated. So this was all investigated by the Great Hangleton Police Force. They came over to Little Hangleton to look into it. And so automatically, seeing that there are no signs of forced entry to the house, your top 2 suspects are going to be Dot and Frank because they have easy access to the victims. And what's really interesting is Dot immediately went on a character assassination journey. She went from discovering the bodies down to the pub of the village to tell everybody how she was sure that it was Frank that killed them.
Before even anything else happened, she was already down there.
She's like, this is what Frank did. So it's heavily suspicious.
That's a bad choice.
Yeah, if I were a Great Hangleton police officer, I would be investigating Dot because that was sus. Yeah. Very sus.
Yeah, extremely.
But the village all believe her. Everyone's just like, yep, Frank came back from the war and he's really angry since he came back from the war. He fought in World War II and he came back angry. Shocker.
I feel like this is worthy of who was it? From Morbid, who's like, what? No way.
Ash.
Ash, yeah.
I love Ash.
There's an Ash response for that. Ash, there needs to be an Ash response.
I would die if she listened to this. But
you hear an Ash, we're looking for you.
But really, it's very messed up. And so everyone just buys into it. Frank's a murderer. And really? Before
they just all
they didn't need any evidence other than Frank is kind of a crotchety guy and he had a key to the house. Now let's dig into this, right? So we've got the police there to investigate it,
right?
There are no visible injuries to these 3 dead bodies. They all have looks of horror on their face. Ooh. But there's no blood, there's no injuries on the bodies. They're just dead.
Right.
That's really weird. So the police take them to the coroner to be examined, and the coroner is like, well, aside from the fact that they are in fact dead, they're all perfectly healthy. There's no cause of death. They just are dead.
Well, that is, especially in a wizarding world, that's very suspicious.
Well, now keep in mind, this is Muggle police dealing with a Muggle murder.
Oh, you did say Muggle police.
Yeah, we haven't gotten to any wizarding components yet.
So this has to be bad.
Yeah, and because of the statute of secrecy, right? They would not jump to, maybe a wizard killed this person. They're just obviously it was killed by another Muggle because magic doesn't exist.
Exactly.
And even though there's absolutely no evidence to point towards it, it must be Frank. Frank definitely did it because Dot told us so.
Dot would never do it.
He gets taken in for it. But ultimately, they can't convict him, right?
There's no evidence.
What's really interesting is Frank actually has a story. Okay. Frank is like, look, I didn't do this, but I was home the night that they were murdered, and I saw a young boy. He may have been around 16 years old, and he had dark hair. He actually kind of looked like Tom Riddle Sr. I saw him climb over the fence and break into the house.
Huh.
And I'm pretty sure he did it.
Okay.
Well, they don't believe Frank's story because there's no sign of anyone breaking into the house.
And he wasn't clearly at a bar telling everybody else about it, which is what ultimate credibility is based on in this town.
What is the thing, like, a lie is halfway around the world before truth can get its pants on?
Yeah.
That's Dot's, like, life memo.
Yeah,
she's like, as long as I tell the story first, it's the truth.
That's the only thing she ever heard when she was little, and she lived by it.
Yeah. So everybody thinks it's Frank, but there's nothing to convict Frank on. Like, you have no evidence to say he did it. So the village is done. The police are baffled. Ultimately, Frank is released due to lack of evidence, but everybody still believes he did it. What's just crazy to me about this, and maybe it's stubbornness on Frank's part, or maybe it's lack of means, because as we know, the only people with money in Little Hangleton were the Riddles. Frank goes back to Riddle Manor and continues to live in the gardener's house.
Okay.
So the house will, like, be changing hands over time. Like, some people buy it. No one ever lives in it again. But some people buy it, and then, like, it's, I don't know. What do rich people do? They own houses just because then, like, it's an asset, whatever.
If it's the 20s, they're probably chasing foxes around on horseback.
Maybe doing, like, falconry. Yeah. But so he continues to care for the house.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's insane. Now, we know, because we're here and we're talking about this, that there is magic involved in this case. So let's dig a little deeper. Let's talk about this 16-year-old with dark hair that looked a lot like Tom Riddle Sr. So, remember, 1926, Rope was giving birth to Tom Sr.'s child. She's now a single mom. Here's the part that we don't know about as people living in Little Hangleton. She dies. So Tom Riddle Jr., which is what she chose to name her son, why, after this man just threw you out like the trash, did you name your child after him? But okay. Is in an orphanage. So he's growing up in an orphanage. This is called Wool's, like the material wool. That's the name of the orphanage. Okay. And his mother dies in childbirth, maybe of a broken heart. We don't know.
Right.
And this kid is sketchy. He is not your average child. So he, more than exhibiting accidental magic, he's actually, like, intentionally using his magic.
Okay.
Not to the point where, like, he's casting spells, right? But he's manipulating it with purpose and having results of it doing what he wants it to do, even though he's not officially casting magic, which is really fascinating. Like, one, I think that's a sign of a powerful wizard. But two, it's showing us that Latin-based spellcasting is not the only way to do magic, which is actually, we could go on a really long tangent. I'm going to save us from this. But magic existed before Rome did. So obviously there was a way to do magic before the language of Latin existed. And so it's almost like he's tapping into that much more archaic magic by doing it without spellcasting, which is crazy that he's doing it as a child.
That's
with
intense.
No training and not actually knowing that he's a wizard. He just knows that he can make things happen.
That's intense.
It'd be great if he was using that for good things, but he was not. So he's learning to do it on purpose, and he's using it to hurt and scare other children so that he can get what he wants. Messy, problematic. He also discovers when he's a child that he can speak Parseltongue. Now, he doesn't know, like, I can speak Parseltongue. What he knows is, I can talk to snakes.
Okay. That's
kind of weird.
That's a leap, I mean.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense. He's like, oh, I can talk to snakes.
Yeah.
But it's still weird. I
yeah,
mean,
right? How many kids do you know that can talk to snakes?
None.
Exactly 0. Okay. So early in his childhood, he actually killed a rabbit. And he actually tortured 2 children in a cave. So Wool's orphanage, they would take the children on, like, occasional vacations to, like, different, like, field trip type areas. And one of them that they went to every year was to go to the ocean at this one area where there was a cave. Well, Tom and 2 children disappeared for, like, a fair amount of time on this trip. And he took them into a cave and tortured them. And when they were found by the adults later, the adults didn't find him torturing him, but he found the 3 of them together. The other kids just, like, wouldn't talk anymore. So, but then you can't, like, prove that Tom did something if they won't tell you. So there's just, like, what do we do about this? We know there's something wrong with him. So what the head mistress of the orphanage is noticing is that Tom's pretty antisocial. He is pretty shifty. So he was stealing from the children. That's another thing where we see his shiftiness. He was manipulating people, children and adults.
Okay.
He was torturing small animals. He was highly intelligent. So, of all of the signs of a sociopath, he's checking off a lot on the list. What's really interesting, too, is with the McDonald triad, the 3 things that would point towards someone maybe becoming a serial killer, he's at least checking off one of them, right, with the animal cruelty. As far as we're aware, we have not seen instances of him doing arson, and we have not heard of any instances of him wetting the bed. Those are the other 2 parts of the triad.
And what's creepy is it sounds like he escalates very fast.
Yeah.
That's kind of creepy when they escalate that fast from torture, like from abusing animals to abusing people. It sounds like there's like very little time in between.
And so he starts this pretty young as a kid, and then he's already done like psychotic stuff by the time he's 11. So at 11 is when a magical person that we're pretty familiar with comes into play. It's Dumbledore. So he actually comes to the orphanage and he tells Tom that he's a wizard and that he is enrolled to come to Hogwarts. So this is where Tom learns what he's been able to do. He learns that magic is real. He learns what Hogwarts is. And he began to think of himself as being even more special. And he gets even more obsessed with learning his heritage, which I don't actually think that it's a bad thing that he was kind of obsessed with wanting to learn his heritage, because he's never known either of his parents and he's growing up in an orphanage.
Yeah, sure.
Like, in his shoes, I would be obsessed with my heritage as well. But it's the like latching on to, oh, I'm special, and oh, I can make people do what I want, and this is why I can, because I have this special power. That's kind of scary. And something else that happens during this is Dumbledore. This is kind of messed up that Dumbledore does this, but I'm never making the case that Dumbledore was an okay dude. He sets Tom's wardrobe on fire, and Tom is like losing his mind, and then Dumbledore like makes it so it's not on fire anymore. So it's magical fire. Nothing was destroyed, right? But that like opens the wardrobe and he reveals this box of knickknacks in there, and the knickknacks are like all of these trophies he's been keeping from like the bad things that he's done. So while that is not in the McDonald triad, it should be. Taking trophies from victims is a sign that you are a fucking serial killer. I'm sorry. There's something wrong with you and you need therapy. Tom Riddle Jr. did not get therapy.
Because you want to, like, the whole point of the trophy is to relive and remember that thing you did. And that's just messed up. And it's interesting that he was told, you know, you're special. And his brain went, oh, I'm special. And that's why I can do all these things. And it's great. I can really do all this stuff. Where, like, Harry goes through a similar setup. You know, like,
kind of. But he doesn't go like, oh, I can just take what I want.
He's like, oh, I can do stuff?
Like I'm
because
a
he's
wizard?
never believed he could.
He tells Hagrid that Hagrid's made a mistake and he has the wrong person.
Yeah.
Like, he does not believe in his specialness.
It's definitely like the, you know, 2 sides of the same coin thing. You know?
For sure. Okay. So now, let's fast forward. We're coming to 1943.
Okay.
This is now when Tom Riddle is 16 years old. He's been at Hogwarts for a while. He definitely knows how to use magic, quite a bit of magic. He is not going to associate himself closely with this, right? But the magical community is going to associate themselves with this murder, because that throws up all sorts of red flags when some muggles show up dead that, like, even the coroner's like, I'm not really sure why these bodies are dead. Like, because other than the fact that they are dead, they're totally fine.
Yeah.
So the magical ministry is like, that sounds like one of ours. So they start looking into it and they're asking questions. They don't go immediately to Tom Riddle Jr. as a suspect. They also don't go to Frank as a suspect because they don't believe Dot and they have 2 brain cells to rub together. What's interesting to me is that they didn't even consider looking at Tom Riddle as a suspect, because Frank's story says that it's a young boy, dark hair, kind of looks like Tom Riddle Sr. They know about Tom Riddle Jr. He's a member of the wizarding community, and he looks a lot like his father. It's weird that nobody went to talk to him, in my opinion.
Is it maybe because, like, Frank's story would have been part of police record, right? Part of their evidence gathering. I wonder if they had no access to that. So they didn't know about Frank's story, but everybody knew about Dot's story.
Maybe they chose not to even try to get it, because it's not like muggles are going to keep a wizard from reading their notes, right? Like the wizard can just take them. But maybe the people investigating the case were so dismissive of the muggle police work because it was bungled that they just didn't even bother to look.
And there's that one key element that was in there that they'd have seen that, they'd be like, hey, wait a minute, that sounds like...
Yeah. But what's really interesting is that their research took them in a different direction. Now, you remember I said Merope Gaunt.
Right.
So she was the village tramp's daughter. Well, the village tramp was Morphin Gaunt. And they went to follow up with him because they already had records on this guy. Because previously he had been convicted of things where he'd been doing muggle baiting, where he'd been attacking muggles. Like, it was very clear that he did not like muggles at all.
Right.
So the Gaunts are actually pure blood wizards, but they are not like what you think of when you say pure blood wizard, because typically when I say that, what comes to mind is like the Malfoys or the Knotts or the Goyles, and like these families are all pretty well off. They have like generational wealth that they're building upon. They're also 1%ers. The Gaunts way back down their lineage were 1%ers, but then they fell on a series of hard times and made bad investments and did gambling and all sorts of things. So they basically had no money. And so it makes sense that they're living just outside Little Hangleton, because everybody except for the Riddles in Little Hangleton has no money.
Yeah.
But they had been there, and they had previously convicted crimes of doing things to muggles, so the ministry went to talk to them. This just blows your mind, right? Morphin Gaunt convincingly confessed to everything. He said that he had done it, no questions asked. He went to Azkaban for the murders, even though he didn't actually do it, and there was no proof that he had done it. And like on the Muggle books, this case remains unsolved. But like in the Wizarding books, we're all like, Morphin did it. But Morphin is an old man.
Yeah.
He's not out there climbing fences and breaking into houses. He would certainly have reason to hate the Riddles because they stole his daughter, in his opinion, and then abandoned her, right? But if he was going to do that, like have some sort of rage episode and go kill the Tom Riddle Sr., probably would have done it in 1926. Like, revenge is not a dish you serve 16 years later for no reason. Like, that's kind of weird, right?
Yeah, it'd be about motive. Yeah, there's motive, but it'd be about opportunity, and there's another one, like motive, opportunity, and something else. Means.
Yeah. And he would have means and opportunity. But, yeah, no motive 16 years later. But what's nuts, and this is never solved on the Wizarding books, but we find out in 1996 that Tom Riddle Jr. did do it. And we find out all of the steps for how he plotted it out and how he put false memories into Morphin's head to make it believable that he had done this. And then got away with all of it. And what's grosser about the whole thing is that Tom Riddle also used this murder to create his first Horcrux. So at 16 is the first time that this absolute sociopath splits his soul in half. And he splits it by killing his own family. So he kills his dad and his grandparents. And it's really interesting. So Horcruxes are disgusting. But it's not just the murder that splits your soul to make the Horcrux. There's actually like a dark ritual that has to be done. And it can be done in advance to like prep it or whatever. But then you commit the murder to tear your soul, and then it's splitting because of the dark ritual that you did, and then you're putting the piece that you tore off like into the item so that it gives you immortality to an extent. But like if you just were any wizard and you make a Horcrux, but say like you have no friends or whatever, and then you get in a terrible accident in the physical body that you're currently living in and dies, technically you're immortal, but technically you're not, because now what's left of you is a disembodied soul and then the piece of your soul that's in an item, but you don't have a body in order to do the spell work that needs to be done to the Horcrux to bring you back into a body. So you would just be a ghost that's not a ghost and not really alive. So in order to effectively have a Horcrux, you have to have like a devotee that is going to put you back into a body.
A Pettigrew.
Yeah, which he does not have at the time.
Right.
So I just find this story really interesting because it's got inept cops, which is always fascinating when you're listening to true crime. It's got pure blood supremacy. It's got 1% rich white people. It's got murder, which is always fascinating as a true crime junkie. And it's all couched within like a million other things that are happening in the Harry Potter series, but like it's really where the origin story for why Voldemort is the way he is starts. I mean, it starts when he's first born, but then this is where I feel like it's cemented that he is absolutely actively being a psychopath, and he's happy with those choices. And maybe that comes from how it all started with the relationship with his mom and his dad, right? Because what we find out in 1996, when all of this other stuff is being revealed, years and years and years after the murders, is that the only reason that Merope Gaunt and Tom Riddle Sr. were even together is because Merope was giving him love potions like the entire time. And they get married while under love potion. They conceive the child while under love potion. And then she's like, you know, it's been a long time. I think that he loves me for real now. So she stopped giving him the love potions. And that's when he abandoned her. Because he was like, whoa, this is crazy. And also, you've been drugging me forever. So Merope, not good. But Tom Riddle Sr. is also not a great guy. But then it comes into this whole theory of like, can a child that is conceived under a love potion, like, turn out okay? Or are they going to be sociopathic and not have the ability to love or care for others because the people who made them didn't even love or care about them? Like, it's a really interesting, like, nature versus nurture. And then, like, we're not off to a great start that the nature part is, like, we're taking two people who are terrible people, putting them together to create you. And then nurture, they're both abandoning you, one truly and one because they died. And then you're in an orphanage where I don't think you can say great things about the orphanage because they knew to an extent that he was doing something to the children and did nothing about it. So it speaks to a level of neglect that exists within the orphanage. Right. Like, he was not exactly set up for success, but you can be born in the dirt. Like, you can have all of your beginnings set you up not to be successful and turn into a good person. Harry Potter is a great example of that. Frankly, you could argue that the Weasleys are an example of that. They're coming from a really rough spot, but they're all loving, caring people that are fighting for good. Right. Like, Riddle actively chose bad every time. Every time he was given a choice, he made the bad choice. And one of those bad choices was to murder people when he was 16. Like, that's just nuts to me. Even with teenage hormones, I was never so angry as a teen that I was like, you know what? I should just kill them. Like, that is not a viable solution.
But it does reflect a bigger problem at large because there are kids who do make that choice, you know, and they are put in horrible situations that lead them down that road. And then, you know, we see it, especially in the U.S., you know, school shootings where kids they're out hunting other kids.
So he doesn't use a gun, but Tom Riddle is a school shooter. Yeah. He just turns basilisk loose on the school, but it's the same thing.
He just didn't have to do it himself.
Yeah.
He's a manipulative school shooter. He gets other people to do it for him.
Yeah.
In a sense.
God, he's messed up. This is one of the most fascinating cases that happens. Like, there's a few different, like, times we get interaction with the legal system throughout the series, and this is just one of the times that I find fascinating and flabbergasting. Like, the only case that is just more to me is Sirius, because he literally didn't even get a trial. Like, right. I think Morphin got a trial, even though he was like, oh yeah, I definitely did it. Yeah. But, like, I'm sure it was, like, open and shut, right? This guy did it. These people are dead. Makes sense. I think that Tom Riddle had stolen his wand to cast the spell, so then the wands would also show that he did it. Yeah. Now I'm gonna have to go back and double check that. My gut tells me I'm correct on that, but I didn't write that down as a note, and so maybe I'm making that up. Don't fact check me. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about this format, but I really wanted to try out like a true crime approach to it. I might try a case that's not in the series next and see if I like that a little bit better.
Yeah.
Because this one, I feel like I didn't have enough material to give you like the backstory lead in and like a strong reveal on who the killer was and all of that. So I don't want to completely throw out Auror Files as an archetype just yet, but I don't know. We'll see it with another case. I'm on the fence about this right now.
Yeah, because you don't have access to as much information. It's only what the universe wants to throw out there.
Yeah.
And it depends on how important they think it is. So.
Yeah, and it's not like we're going to go find a bunch of books written on this murder or read blogs on this murder. But I don't know. Listeners, tell me what you think.
Yeah, hit us up.
Okay. Thanks for tuning in. If you're jonesing for more witchy goodness between episodes, you can check us out on Instagram at Dusty Cauldron Podcasts, on Facebook at the Dusty Cauldron Podcast group, on email at dustycauldronpodcast@gmail.com, or you can check out our website, www.dustycauldronpodcast.com, and you can subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening if you want to hear more. And remember, Tom Riddle Sr. is actually his own father. Tom Riddle Jr. is actually the person that was murdered. And Tom Riddle Jr., air quotes, was really Tom Riddle III, which is Voldemort. Don't forget to stir whatever you've got brewing in your cauldron right now. Bye.
Bye.